Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the NIL show. Adam Cook here with Sean Ellenby. Stephen Farrig is out this week. So we are really excited to be joined today by Vic Denardi. Vic has a wonderful background, having spent time in the NFL, having spent time in multiple tech startups around the NIL space, as well as with the NCAA as a compliance enforcer. Is that your title when you're in compliance? They call you an enforcer. Is that how it works?
They did technically. I know we did shy away from that. I've been called the suit from many places throughout my many stops. So we always shied away from that. But I did a presentation to an NFL club, and we specifically dressed down. And sure enough, the GM got up there and introduced me as the suit from New York. And I was like, oh, man, that's a lot of hard work. That's just been thrown out in about 3 seconds in my introduction to the team. So, but yeah, enforcers was kind of the rule. No badge, no nothing. Every once in a while I lobbied for a badge or a ticket book, but nope, didn't have any of those fun things. It just, they wouldn't put enforcer on a business card either. So, maybe LinkedIn is where the place to just, own up to it.
I love it.
You're like, if I'm not getting paid enough to be the suit from New York, right?
Yeah. At that time, for sure. I was a low-level guy, and I got to go to the teams that nobody really wanted to go to and just kind of give this presentation out. And I got, quarterbacks and coaches and owners staring at me, and boom, the suit from New York. I was like, oh, man. I don't even think I owned a suit at that point. Much to Roger Goodell's chagrin.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love it. Well, Vic, we're really excited. Obviously, very grateful to have your time, be able to chat from your experience. But we always try to kick it off with kind of a fun question, right? You spent a lot of time in the NIL space. What would be your dream slam dunk NIL deal for Vic Denardi today? Who would you want to sign a restaurant NIL deal with this afternoon if you could?
Are you putting yourself in 43-year-old Vic shoes, or back to 19-year-old Vic when I was playing football?
Dealer's choice.
We always dreamed at St. John's, and this was the one that couldn't be. Now, I was at St. John's before they had dorms, so me and 5 guys split an apartment in Queens, which was very nice. And we kind of had cost of attendance before that was really a thing. But we always dreamed if we had just a little bit extra scholarship money that there'd be a pallet of beer in that corner every single month being dropped off. So I know you can't get a Bud Light deal or a Coors Light deal, but that's probably 18-year-old Vic's dream right there. I guess I should say 21-year-old Vic's dream because, I waited till I was 20.
There you go.
Yes. but probably some of those things that, I don't know if I have a specific one. I guess everybody would say Chick-fil-A, which, I didn't get till I moved out here to the Midwest being a New Yorker forever. But going around and talking to a lot of schools and campuses, administrators, that's what I hear is the number one deal that the kids love is just going to the local burrito store and, hey, whenever you're in here, just tweet that you're here and your burritos and nachos are free. As an offensive lineman, I don't think I could go wrong with any of those kind of – here's just a free meal whenever obviously I was there before social media, but just somehow plug the local little deal and getting a freebie would be great. So if I can't do the Bud Light one, maybe Chick-fil-A or whatever, try to plug a local business for sure.
I tell you what, I'd be having breakfast study hall at Chick-fil-A. I'd be having lunch study hall at Chick-fil-A. Yes. I mean, I could tweet, hey, checking into Chick-fil-A all day. Give me a little bit of extra Chick-fil-A sauce on the side.
I got to introduce my dad to it a few years ago. We actually, I'm from New York originally, came out to Indianapolis about 9 years ago. I have a sister in Pittsburgh, and we went to a Pirates game. The whole kind of family met up, and they had the Chick-fil-A truck there, the food truck, just giving out sandwiches at this pregame. My dad's like, I don't understand. What's the allure? We're just like, just try, Dad. Just try. And then next 3 later, he's like, these are pretty good. Can I get another one?
I love it.
Guys, Chick-fil-A, I went to Maryland at Chick-fil-A in our student union, or at Maryland in the student union, there was a Chick-fil-A. And when I was in college, I got to the point where I couldn't even look at the Chick-fil-A. If I looked at it, it was game over. I had to go. As soon as I smelled it, as soon as I looked at it, I had to go. And then later on, we always had it in our press box for football games and basketball games. And so a free Chick-fil-A before the game was always great.
It's always brilliant. It's a brilliant move for restaurant franchises, right? Like get the students hooked early. It was always like as a coach, it was always our pregame meal because it was like part of our little, on campus thing. Then you get to a place where you're like, man, I've had a hot chicken sandwich 4 days in a row. I probably should switch to a salad.
Well, and now they're doing the thing where they're like if you miss two free throws, like somebody at the line in the second half at a basketball game for college students, then they'll get a free Chick-fil-A sandwich or something. It's like brilliant promotions.
I remember, I think the first one that opened up in New York City was actually on the campus of NYU. And I remember they had to cut down because people were faking NIU student cards in Manhattan to go to Chick-fil-A. And then there's a few there, and they have to actually like cordon the line, I've been told by people, because it stretches multiple blocks in the city. So you have to get them away and make sure nobody gets run over standing in the middle of the road. And then a few of the things I always heard football recruiting-wise is places in like, outside kind of the traditional Chick-fil-A footprint that boosters are trying to bring Chick-fil-A to those schools to get Southern kids to go there because they're like, that's one of the things kids go there. So it's there, it's Whataburger, it's In-N-Out Burger that, some boosters are trying to bring close to campus. So when a kid comes on a visit, they really want to go to that school. So NIL is a big thing, but it's amazing what all goes into recruiting. Yeah.
Yep. Well, Vic, tell us.
That's awesome.
So tell us. So you were offensive lineman at St. John's, and then you went on to the NFL. Walk us through a little bit of what you did for the NFL. You were in security, you were in compliance. You just told us a little story about having the moniker, the suit from New York. So tell us a little bit about what you did for the NFL and how that bridged over to the NCAA.
Yeah. So from graduating at St. John's, I actually I was a graduate assistant, so I coached football at D2 for a little bit, kind of bridged those few years. Kind of realized that wasn't for me. I enjoyed the 90-hour weeks and, all those other things. But actually, before even security, I got a really entry-level job doing data entry at the NFL, making $12 an hour. That was only supposed to be a 3-month job that I stretched that into a year. And then a security job came open I was the football guy in the security department. So it was a small department. And I was really brought into it was a bunch of former FBI agents and state police officers and whatnot that were a great group of guys and ladies. But I was a football person, so I helped decipher the playoffs. So my VP would call me in every year about the beginning of December and say, who could host a playoff game? And I'd go through all the scenarios and I'd be like, well, the Jets could host it, but like 4 different things have to happen. Vic, I don't care what can happen. As long as there's a chance, I need to know about it. I'm like, it's 8 teams have to tie, boss. It can still happen. So he's planning for all that. Eventually, I got to handle the security aspects for Super Bowl credentialing. So for the Super Bowl non-media, when I was there, again, about 10 years ago or so, we issued 35,000 credentials, and all of them had an FBI background check. So I worked with FBI headquarters to facilitate all those checks, and then the FBI or whoever was in charge could yay or nay whoever got a credential. So that'd be fun on seeing the Super Bowl to tell somebody, hey, Sean, you're here, but for some reason I can't tell you your credentials yanked. So thanks a lot, go home. That made me a really popular person at the league office too. People at around that time running up to me all their sins and asking if they were going to get to work or not, which I never had an answer for. My main responsibilities, I did all the background checks on all the players who went to the combine too. So, right after the season ended or the college season ended, when those invites came out, all the players that got an invite to the combine got also an invite to fill out some background questionnaire forms that I had processed and reported out to every team. And it was the standard background that any employee got. So there was no people following kids around, no in-depth things. Right. We checked out those things. And like anything else, there's laws and HR guidelines, what we could and couldn't report. But so from January until the day of the draft, I was running all those backgrounds, making sure the clubs had all the updated information, answering all the questions that the clubs had, which was a lot on some background guys, and going through that. Yeah. So I learned a lot. My bad joke is I probably saw everything short of murder in those background reports. and I learned a lot what really teams wanted to know. Obviously, the serious crimes and those things. And I kind of started when Roger took over as commissioner, so we all know those times and what happened there. But the amount of teams that really cared about parking tickets or speeding tickets and how many they got in. And there were some teams that hey, if they're all clustered together at one point, hey, maybe he got a new car and just like going fast, and that happened. So that's his excuse. And others teams are like, well, he's got one every year for 5 years, so at least he doesn't do it all at once. He spreads it out, and just the insight and all the teams that like trying to read into these things and all that was really interesting from that level.
I am sure teams, like if they wanted a guy bad enough, they could find ways to work around those speeding tickets or stretch it so they're like, oh, we can get around this way
for
or the
sure.
other way.
And there'd be times where I had teams call me up and ask me for a detailed background report and gave it to them, and either the security person or the GM would be like, man, they're off my board. Just off my board. And then I would sit in the office, and I had a great job on draft day sitting at my desk watching it on TV like everybody else did, but had to be there to answer the phone in case of that. And also, if there wasn't a lot of trades for other players, but trades involving players, they'd want a background report, especially if some things were mostly making sure that a player wasn't going to come in suspended or lose some things. And the amount of times on day two, I worked at what is a 2-day draft or a 3-day draft. You get a call on day 3 from somebody else, and that same guy who told you he was off the board, and they drafted the guy in the 5th round. And I'd be like, hey, what happened? Yep. I thought he was off your board. Well, he was off my board in round 2. Round 5 is a whole different story. He came back on the board. And it just, having teams call me up and ask me, like, hey, we're asking you this in confidence. I have no vested interest who you draft, so I'm not running and telling every other club that you're looking on the backgrounds of these. But that was a really interesting job there. We mentioned the suit from New York. I did policy and procedure demonstrations to the club, so it would go out and tell them the fun things about the personal conduct policy, the gambling policy, all the things they couldn't do, but also got to tell them about a bunch of great programs that the league had that was supportive of them. But again, those times were a lot of either 8 a.m. first thing in the morning, and that's what everybody likes is a nice HR meeting with the guy from the league office. I had few that were right after meals or right before meals in team meetings. So those are the ones I got a lot of questions on when guys didn't want to go to practice or whatnot, just stalling out the coach. Getting really frustrated. I had one team that was 8:30 on their last night of mini camp, and I was the last thing separating them from a month and a half off. So I got there, and my counterpart from the club was like, I already cut out half your slides. I covered them already today, which is great. And then I had 3-star players about 10 minutes into the presentation start standing up and putting their backpacks up on the back of the room and giving me the old, hey, look at the time, and wrap that one up really quick. But then working with, like I said, FBI agents and law enforcement, I was never going to rise up too high in a security role. And I was told that from day one. So I was able to transition to a role at the NCAA. I turned college as my bad dad joke. And got to join what was called the Football Development Group, kind of at its infancy. And as part of enforcement and the enforcers, but I really wasn't somebody who came and investigated a case from head to toe and brought it to the committee of infractions. I was used as a resource for the club. So I liaison with the Pac-12 and the MAC primarily, but really all schools and every level of football, from high school, college, obviously professional with my contacts there, and educated them about the rules, but really was a sounding board for coaches and administrators and student athletes to tell us, what rules were working, what weren't. Hey, you guys, you're focused way over here as the NCAA sometimes does, and you guys are way off base. That stuff doesn't matter for recruiting, doesn't matter coaching. You guys need to point your eyes here and see what's going on. So to do that and, give coaches, like I said, a voice in the rules, and also let us know some bad actors, what's going on and what we should be looking at there.
I think it's so interesting. Is Sean and I and our team kind of continues to dive into working across, so many more universities in different conferences and, state lines that have different either understandings or applications of NIL legislation. I just have so much more appreciation and context, I think, around, the university compliance directors as well, around like, okay, this is a whole new ballgame that we have to dive into. And there's so many competing priorities and interpretations and things. And I love just, hearing straight from the horse's mouth, your experience around, look, it's not just saying you can't do that, or I'm coming in to cut your knees out from under you, but so much more around, hey, here's how we can apply this, or here's where we should be focusing, or, here's some cool programs that we have in place that can actually help you. I love that kind of approach to it. And I think that's where, a lot of maybe the NCAA gets a pretty bad rap, or maybe even compliance directors at institutions get a bad rap, but that's not what they're there for. So I appreciate that perspective.
For sure, and definitely, I learned a lot, and I had great respect for. I mean, when I was playing and coaching, compliance was the last person you wanted to see. You're always in trouble, and starting this role in enforcement, when that compliance person came, especially when I was a coach, it was like, oh man, did I fill my forms out right?
Yep.
Who did I call when I shouldn't? Or it's going to be, I worked all day, had a 3-hour practice, and now I have to do an hour-long rule seminar about something that I was coaching D2, so we were never going to break those rules. So it is an extremely tough job, and you're dealing with coaches who, can be, ornery on the best of days, and so most of the time you were not delivering good news. And that was, again, when I became an enforcer to start, I was calling up these schools cold and say, hey, I'm in the enforcement department. I want to come out and visit you and take an hour of your time, coach. And nope. I have no desire to have enforcement on my campus no matter what. And, I don't break the rules. Coach, hey, everybody breaks the rules. The manual is about this thick. Everybody breaks. You're going to dial a kid at the wrong time. I break all the rules all the time too. And I don't know it. So some of them didn't want to hear that. And, bad news.
And there's rules, but then there's also the interpretation of the rules, which I think is what drives me the most crazy, and probably drives compliance directors the most insane, is that yes, there is a set of rules that are in place, but we can all interpret them a different way, and every school does. When you were at the NCAA, how did you guys navigate that?
It was always a push, because we in enforcement felt the same thing. We'd have a case, and there's a whole department of 50 people that just interpret the rules, and at times I can be a very black and white person, and just it's a rule or it isn't a rule. And you do learn that there are shades of gray, and that's where coaches live. And so there are times we had a full blown case going to the end, and somebody in that department would say, no, we don't think it's a violation. Here's why. And that was a lot of the questions I fielded too, is all compliance starts local. So those compliance directors have a horrible job, because they're the ones who kind of first rule on something. So if a coach comes to you and says, can I do this? The school compliance person is kind of the first one that says, nope, that's impermissible. Or they can say, yes, it is permissible, with the caveat that if it's deemed impermissible later, now the wrath of the NCAA is going to come down on you. So they have to be very careful in those rulings. But of course, the coach is always the one that says, yeah, it's permissible, or at my old school I did this, or how come this coach is tweeting about this? So it goes through a long bureaucracy throughout the end game. But it's kind of, when nobody can see the right thing, or I don't say the right thing, but the same thing on an issue, it gets kind of crazy, and everybody's very protective of their stance at all levels, from the compliance director to the coach to the AD to the enforcement person to the president of the NCAA. Everybody thinks their view is right, and that's how we do it. So it did kind of get maddening, and just trying to figure out, well, what the heck is the rule here? Because to me, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there are times where we changed the rule, and they'd go back, and someone would find an interp from 1987 and be like, well, we want to kind of do this. We're trying to live in the 21st century, and you're going by 19th century. It doesn't work.
I kind of want to get into the nitty gritty, into the meat of it here, because this is, you're talking about interpretation, you're talking about, old rules versus new rules. And we've said this before on the show, we say it a lot around our office, but how often do you get to kind of live through a time where not just one rule has tweaked, but all of a sudden there has been massive upheaval of, large scale, we'll call it legislation. It's not technically legislation, but we'll call it legislation. The way that the NCAA approaches it, I think a lot's been said around how they handled things immediately after July 1st, 2021, right? Kind of taking their step back, maybe being a little bit more vague. I'd love just to kind of armchair quarterback it with you, having been with the NCAA. Like, what would you have done differently, maybe, in terms of the implementations right away from a governing body like the NCAA, trying to manage all the new stuff literally overnight?
Yeah, it was a tough time. I was there for that. We were there. Everybody was living it and trying to figure out, what was going on. I mean, totally. to really armchair it is to go back a year and a half when the NIL committee was formed, and like you kind of said, we'll call it legislation. and it's not an easy topic, and I don't want to come off like bashing anybody, but they
no, of course
they
not.
didn't come up with any legislation, they didn't come up with a policy, and rock in a hard place doesn't even come close to the circumstance we're in, because like you kind of mentioned before, there's state laws firing off at the hip that don't know what they're doing, that are just changing the laws, and it's easy to say, well, then you just sue a state and say, hey, don't come in here and tell us how to do our business. We're this business. And I've kind of said that for a while, because for years I've been asked by college athletes, when am I going to get paid? Now, going in, you're not going to get paid. So if you want to be a regular student, be a regular student. Obviously, it's not the climate we're in now. I kind of think this is the best they could do. Many times they came to us and said, what do you think about this policy? And I think the toughest one is the no recruiting inducements, because everybody knows everything done in college sports is all about recruiting. There's not a single aspect of your program that does not have something to do with recruiting until this year. So I think last year, July 1, we know that NIL came to be in the form that we're at still, the interim NCAA policy. And I think about a month later, Coach Saban gets up at the SEC Media Day and says Bryce Young has $1 million in NIL deals. A month into it. And until this year, I'm not in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, so maybe he's got a lot of deals down there. And this year he's got the Dr. Pepper thing, which is obviously great money and a good opportunity for him. But, and that's his own private business. Why is Coach Saban out there saying that at media days? Because he wants every high school senior, high school junior in the world to know, you come to Alabama, you're getting $1 million deals. And there's some people at the NCAA who are like, oh, this isn't going to be involved in recruiting. And, it was just a face slap moment. And then if we want to go really down the rabbit hole and tie that into the transfer portal, which was, another whole thing that wasn't going to be involved in recruiting, and this wasn't going to have anything to do with each other. And it's like, everybody take a breath and step back and just see where we're going. And, I don't think no policy is kind of a bad thing. I was very much, there was talk about a third party administrator, and I didn't know how that would work. You can't start setting terms of deals and to say what fair market value is, because to me, fair market value is what anybody's willing to pay. So if somebody's willing 100%. To pay Bryce Young $1 million to come and do ads for Dr. Pepper or whatever local company, good for him and good for the school and good for everybody making it out. So like I said, and, again, we talked about before my, ideal deal. From what I heard from most schools, the average deal is between $500 and $1,000 for a student athlete. Obviously, there are outliers on both directions, but a lot of student athletes are getting some free gear and free burritos and very happy with that. And we don't have to, freak out that some student athletes in all sports. And it's not just football or basketball. It's been great for Olympic sports. It's been great for women's sports. A lot of women are out there getting fantastic NIL deals. And, the world has kept spinning. I know a lot of people thought on July 2nd, college sports wasn't going to implode. We can go back and start cashing receipts and just saying who thought that college sports was going to end. And this was, this eighth sign of the apocalypse. But we're still here. Someone argue it's better than ever.
Here we are.
And we're still going.
Yeah. How much, because we deal with this a lot and have to have a lot of these conversations. I think we're all pretty proud here of the solution that we have around, holistic offerings for athletic departments. And you just talked about it there a little bit. We're seeing a lot of benefit in Olympic sports and women's sports. And, it's not just about, basketball and football. How much of some of those conversations, or maybe the approach of that interim policy or future policies, do you think is really focused on, oh, geez, this is going to be a problem at football, and so let's solve that and just kind of not worry about what happens at maybe some of the other non-revenue sports, versus look, because essentially this is the problem with the governing body, right? You're trying to come up with solutions for everybody. And that's a challenging thing to do. So how much of that conversation is balanced around, this is going to be a problem with football, we can't go down this path, even though it's right for everybody else, versus this is the right thing to do for a collegiate athletics program, we're going to do it, and football's going to have to figure it out, or basketball's going to have to figure it out, or what have you.
Yeah, that's a big topic of discussion, because not even, amongst sports, but we have 3 levels. We have Division I, Division II, Division III. So this policy was for all levels. So you're trying to make a policy fit for the Division III player who's, always been there to have fun and just, get some financial aid. And, most of my friends play D3. I think D3 sports are fantastic, but to try to have a policy that worked for them and for the Bryce Youngs of the world is really tough to do. And then, so it's splitting the baby in many different parts is tough. And so that was a lot of it. I know a lot of the discussion was on, student athletes a year ago. It's still kind of popular. I'll date myself, but, having a Twitch account and just playing video games that were having a YouTube account, just monetizing that, which was very big. It had nothing to do with their athletic prowess, but, it all got tied up because they were a student athlete at X university. And that's where, credit Division II and Division III, they were kind of the leaders in this space and said, our student athletes don't have full scholarships. They have financial aid and they need ways to go out and, supplement their income. And this is, nobody's really bribing, a Division II player to come to a school or, setting up deals for them. So let's get this through. And yeah, you're right. Part of it was, some D1 players and dragging their feet. And we all kind of know the conferences that, again, football's the cash cow. Everybody's looking for an advantage. You have a 14 playoff. So those spots are very coveted and very, very wealthy. And so everybody's kind of looking at it from that point of view. And that's where, again, I give them some credit. Maybe hands off was the best policy. There's a lot of talk of guardrails and rules and whatnot. And the NCAA showed a lot of restraint for once that just said, hey, we're going to have two tenets, no pay for play and no recruiting inducements. And again, we can knock both of those down real easy, though, too, because everything has to do with recruiting. And it's all pay for play. I mean, you guys as an NIL company, when I was working for an NIL company, we're not looking to set up deals with the biochemistry major. Good for them. But,
right.
they're not selling materials. So if you're not on the team, that's going to affect your standing in the marketplace. But, those are two. If you're going to have two rules, I think those were two pretty good ones to have. And we can get to enforcing them, which is a whole other story, though.
That's what I was going to say is, have the rules, but who's enforcing those rules when it comes down to it? I want to ask you this.
I was going to say my former enforcers are trying their best. And it's all rules, honestly. I got a lot of tips. And before this, we always had tips that a player got paid under the table or now that he's getting money to transfer. This NIL deal is really phony. And, but then again, how do you go and prove it? Which is a complete different thing to do and very difficult to do. Sure. And they're not just a bunch of people at Indy sitting on their hands doing nothing. They're actively going out there and asking the tough questions, but there's only so much they can do. And, at some point you just got to move on, and it's tough for the public to see, but it is what it is.
Well, and we've chatted before too, like we've had guests on the show, who are practicing attorneys, and they talk a lot about where almost that like jurisdiction stops, right? With the NCAA, like, there's no subpoena power. There's no, like at some point you're like, look, we're doing our best to enforce these. And somebody saying this is happening is different than proving that it's happening. And to your point, Vic, there's only so much we can do, and we're going to do our darndest. Right. But it's a challenging task for sure. Go ahead, Sean. I know you had a good question.
Yeah, no, Vic, I was curious. I want to hear your thoughts. One of the things I've been hearing recently from some coaches at the high level, especially on the basketball side, is that they want to see players start getting a cut from some of those preseason tournaments that they're involved in, or even the NCAA tournament, seeing a cut of whether it's a bonus of making the tournament or whatever it might be. Do you see that as being a viable thing in the future, something that could happen?
That's going to be a tough one. You're getting really into the employment phase, and that's, I am no lawyer, thank goodness, but that's where it really starts getting difficult if you are an employee of the university and how things happen. But I do see, part of, living in that world and talking to coaches, and you guys know, is there's a million and one loopholes to kind of really kick open the door. So what's to say that the sponsor of one of those preseason tournaments or even a football bowl game now starts entering into an NIL deal with the whole team? And that's how kind of you get around that. And I know there's talk about some golfers kind of doing that, and the Live Tour is kind of new and out there and trying to get some college golfers out there. And you can play in the professional tournaments as an amateur, but how do I pay them? So maybe it's a higher sponsorship deal. There's a lot of talk about, putting money into some sort of escrow account and paying out after they've graduated. That was, I don't want to say a trick, but that was an old thing that was always talked about before NIL came to be of, we're just going to store the money aside. And so you're not getting it when you're an amateur, but when you leave college, you can get it. So those type of things are going to be really interesting. And then, it comes all the way down to, you start doing NIL deals on official visits. Is that a way to get more students to visit your school? If you're a local car dealer and you want a quarterback, and hey, I'll pay for you to come out here to shoot a commercial for me or whatnot, or however else I want to do it. And that gets you on campus. And while you're here, you can go and tour the campus, see whoever you want. But, that's a way for me to fly you around and do the things. And that's, one thing NIL has really done is gotten the boosters. They're always involved, but, more involved in the recruiting process and having them more of a say of who gets recruited to school and how it happens.
The bowl thing's really interesting to me. I think that would be really cool. Like, say a team's in the Outback Bowl. Outback Steakhouse is spending a ton of money already to sponsor that bowl. Imagine, I don't know, you have 2 weeks between the bowl and the game, or when it's announced and the game actually happening. If you could get the kid in a commercial or some promotional items, that'd be pretty cool. I don't know. I would love to see bowls do that. I think it'd be awesome.
And they already have the merchandise room or whatnot, so they get their bowl gifts and whatnot. So those things, but I mean, it's going to be really a tool for somebody who's going to skip the bowl game. If I was going to skip out of the bowl game because I'm going to go pro or whatnot, now do you say, hey, $10,000, come and shoot this commercial, and you have to play in the game?
Yeah.
Does that okay? Now maybe I'll play in this game. Now it's worth it for me to
keep star player in.
Yeah. So I think those are things that definitely could come being in a few years, especially the basketball and the football spaces for sure.
Do you see? We talked about boosters getting a lot more involved. They obviously have always been involved, but now it's more above the table. And a really interesting thing that I think we've watched pan out on the collective and booster side is at SC, right? You have this collective that's spinning up, that's student led, that the institution maybe isn't super on board with and are asking them to not, but because they're entirely outside of the scope of the NCAA as well as the institution, they're like, hey, we're going to do our thing, right? So I just think that's created a really interesting conundrum for the NCAA, trying to figure out, okay, how do we hold collectives responsible when maybe they are blatantly acting against the wishes of the institution and doing things that maybe aren't, compliant. Who do we hold accountable to that? Do you see maybe collectives or boosters almost folding back into the institutions in a more official capacity in the future, so that they can come under the umbrella of some of the policies that the NCAA has in place?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that as schools look at it, and we're still only 16 months in, a little less than that. Everybody's still trying to figure everything out, and so we're going through these steps. And pat myself on the back and some of my former coworkers. We're definitely some of those people out there shouting from the rooftop in that building that we didn't call them collectives, but groups of boosters are going to form together to give out deals. Totally. And honestly, they're probably a lot more, like you said, above board than we thought they'd be. They're out there really getting deals for the student athletes and bringing them in and using all those new forms of technology to do it. But yeah, it's an excellent point. If you have this rogue group that has nothing to do with the school, that the school's done everything they can to educate their student athletes. But again, you walk a fine line saying, I don't know if as a school I can tell you, Adam, hey, don't go do business with that company. That's not your business to say. If it's a legitimate company out there that's going to pay you to work, that's, as a student athlete, you're going to probably just look at them funny, and then you're going to risk the student athlete going to the transfer portal if they're really good, and that's not what you want to. So, and if you go to that, that entity, the collective, the business or whatever, because it doesn't have to be a collective. It could be just a one booster with, some sort of business that they want to advertise, or just a group of people that just do what they want to do. And this has always been the case. If you had a rogue booster 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we've all seen the 30 for 30s out there doing stuff. Yeah. The school's going to be saying, don't you do that, but I can't tell you what to do. So the biggest tool the NCAA has is disassociation. So they could tell you to disassociate with that person. I think as a compliance person, as a school, you lay out all the steps you've already taken, like the USC has done. In public, we've said we don't want to have anything to do with them. We've tried to educate them. We've tried to educate our student athletes on what to do. So you're going to get two scenarios. Either you're going to say, yeah, I disassociate from that group, and the group can be like, okay, that's great. We were never really associated with you to begin with, and you can't tell me as this company that I can't do business with Adam and Sean because, you're not in that business, and then so there was always the things about taking tickets away and those things. So some of these collectives and boosters don't care about that anymore, quite honestly. Or some of them are just going to be looking to itch for a fight saying, you can't take my tickets away. I'm doing a legal thing. I am a legal entity. I'm allowed under my state law to enter into agreement with these student athletes. I'm not breaking any law. I'm breaking your policy, but that's not my policy. So it's a really tough position that, everybody's at, the NCAA, the schools, the student athletes, these collectives that want to do things the right way. And even the ones that aren't doing things, quote unquote, the right way. That's just the NCAA's right way. Their right way and their business right way are completely different things. So I see some of it being folded possibly under the auspices of the school. You're going to get into things, group licensing, using marks and trademarks, and some of those carrots that the schools have to make their offers really more attractive for the student athletes, and they can shut out some rogue companies that way. But from an NCAA point of view and a compliance point of view, it's very difficult that, we don't have a lot of tools to go after them.
Do you see in terms of states having different rules? I'll give you an example. Some of the schools that we work with in certain states, they can retweet what we're doing. They can support their athletes. They can support NIL stuff. There's some other schools in other states that they can't even acknowledge us, that we even exist. Do you see this model where it's state by state by state continuing, or is the NCAA going to be able to somehow work in a blanket model that all states can follow, all schools can follow, and everybody's on that same plane, following the same rules?
Yeah, that model you're talking about, I know the NCAA has worked to try to go get a federal law that would encompass all the states. Not to get political, but I would hope any Congress has a lot better things on their plate to do than worry about.
That's fair. It's totally fair.
But the state-by-state model is very, difficult and cumbersome, and it's very interesting now that you're seeing some of the first states to implement NIL rules are the first states to come back and repeal their laws and be like, we've seen. That was one thing the NCAA policy did that no state thought was going to happen, was just kind of the hands-off approach. We got these couple rules, and that's it. So. Quite a few states have just said, nope, I want my law off the books because my school's now at a disadvantage for, these type of things. And, I think Oregon, when it first came out, said that you couldn't use the school's logo and trademarks in any deal. And the schools were like, we kind of don't like that. And so I know they amended it and cut it back a little bit, but that's been a tough talking to a lot of compliance people in the last year. That's been very difficult on them navigating, obviously the state law. And, some coaches I've talked to have been flat out said, oh, I'm calling the governor up. And there's some of the few people that can do it and, getting the law changed or what do you mean I can't do this? Well, that's your law. But the other thing with them is there's no real penalty associated with anything for good or for bad. So some states have, reporting disclosures. And I know I came across that in the last year. Whose job is it to report to the school the deal? Is it the company's job to call the school up and say we're entering into an agreement with the student athlete? Is it their agent? Is it the student athlete themselves? And then what happens if the deal doesn't get reported? And I know I've had schools quite honestly tell me that's not a requirement in our state. I've called them up and say, hey, just we're doing a deal with your student athlete, and nope, don't want to hear about it. Nice to talk to you again, Vic, but please, if you go any further, I'm going to hang up on you because I don't want to know about the deal. I don't need to know about a deal. And boom, and I've had other states, other schools tell me, well, this is the third time he hasn't reported the deal. I got to go tell coach. I'm like, you're really going to go suspend a kid for not reporting? Well, it's the law, so it's our policy. So I was like, well, that's up to you guys. But that puts everybody in a tough situation. So I could see some of the states kind of evening out and loosening their restrictions, or even, to use our term from before, give an interpretation what really needs to be done and what's important in this space. But it might be one of those things where we never have a level playing ground.
Yeah. That brings up a kind of another interesting point is around this topic of what NIL has done for realignment talks, right? And when you're talking about, you spend a lot of time at the Pac-12. Obviously, some pretty high profile news around the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and institutions, changing conferences there. That idea of a level playing field is seemingly getting further and further away, right? So, aside from just the general, again, we can talk about UCLA and SC and whatever. What other things, or how do you see NIL continuing to impact some of these realignment conversations as we move into the next, I mean, this is probably, the next 5 to 10 years, most likely.
Yeah, I think it goes to whether we can balance this student athlete versus employee thing. And I mean, the Big 12 commissioner's kind of been very forward thinking, I think, to say we're going to have that conversation sooner rather than later, that, we're going to have to incorporate some of these things in some sort of revenue sharing, or how do we, let them be more active in exposing their NIL rights. And I spoke to a school a few months ago that officially, talking to them, they were very much like, we're not facilitating deals. That's not our role. We're here as a conduit, make sure everybody buys the rules. And at the end of the day, I was there, they looked at me and they said, yeah, we got to figure out a way to facilitate deals because you got other coaches out there. So I've had that a lot in my career too, just, hey, I've gotten the official company line. Then, after, a day of talking to them, you get the real line, which, it is. And we do have to find a way to make this all marriage and work together. But, realignment's been slowly moving forever. From the last go round, we've always heard rumblings that, in my old position, talking to a lot of people, that it was a matter of time before these shoes dropped. I don't know if anybody really saw, the two LA schools jump into the Big Ten. I mean, my thing too, from an NIL point of view is, I don't know if USC and UCLA are very attractive from an NIL point of view as a student athlete. Yes, they got collective. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a lot going on, but I mean, you look at Caleb Williams out there, great quarterback. I'm not out there anymore, day to day, seeing what's going on. But if you're a company, you guys are an NIL company, you had the opportunity to sign Caleb Williams to a deal or Matt Stafford. What quarterback are you going after? There's 10, 15 pro teams.
It's a very crowded space.
It's extremely crowded space with a lot of options, as opposed to, Tuscaloosa, Columbus, Ohio, Ann Arbor, Michigan. You're kind of owning the space right there, and you're getting a lot more bang for your buck getting, one of those quarterbacks that really resonate with the community and where, college sports is the king of the mountain. So I know everybody always said, like, those schools, Rutgers, the big city schools were going to really, rule the NIL world. And I always thought it was going to be the opposite. The smaller markets were going to be able to take advantage and get more quality deals for their student athletes, even those lower ones for the local restaurants or businesses that, just kind of want to be part of it. So, it's interesting from that point of view, but those are all about TV money and how that, equates to it and bringing more eyes to the screen and just shuttering out all competition. So it's going to be we're going to see some, the rich getting richer. And I was told by a number of Power 5, ADs in the last 10 years that we're really more like a group of 5 school, but we just happen to be in this conference for forever. So we're stringing along and football rules the roost. And as we all know that, what's also interesting is the NCAA doesn't see a penny from college football. They don't control the playoff. They don't control the bowl structure, any of that. That goes right to the schools. So that's something that, when I tell a lot of people out in the public, they never realize that college football is really handled. Basketball tournament, whole other story. But that football world is all into itself.
Well, I know we're coming up against time. I just want to say a couple of things as we have a compliance enforcer on here, former compliance enforcer on here. I had a lot of really good friends that I worked with that were in the compliance office. I always used to joke with them that when they came around, they were like the Grim Reaper. It was like, man, I just want to have fun. I want to post something fun on social media. You always have to turn me down. I know at the end of the day, they had a job to do just like I did. But I always said, and this is prior to NIL, that compliance officers have had the toughest job in the department. There's so much pressure on them from coaches constantly hounding them. How are we getting this guy eligible? What are we doing? How are we getting him through? What are we doing? There's pressure from parents. There's pressure from the students. And then there's pressure from the NCAA to follow the rules and do what they're supposed to do. On top of that, they're also supposed to self-enforce a lot of things. And I mean, I can't imagine what that's like, because ultimately, if you don't self-enforce and you don't report something that you saw going on, your school may have a larger penalty at the end of the day. And so there's just a lot of stuff that they go through that's really difficult. They have to make really hard decisions and sometimes be that bad guy. And now they have NIL on top of all that stuff, which is like literally an entire another job, and nobody knows what they're doing. So all you compliance officers out there, you know who you are. Thanks for all you do. I know it's a difficult job. But I just had to get that in there. I never really thought about the NCAA side of it, Vic, but I feel for you guys too. So thanks for what you guys did too.
Oh, totally echo those sentiments. Yeah, and when NIL was first coming out, it took a lot of calls from compliance people that said, just not on my plate. And anytime something new comes out, it just always rolls downhill to compliance. And it's just, and kind of just, real quick, just two ones, similar stories. When I first went out and was doing meetings and sitting with coaching staffs and whatnot, it was when text messaging was still illegal for football coaches to do. And I was in a room with an entire coaching staff and just, hey guys, what do you think about texting? Should you guys be allowed to do it or not allowed to do it? What are your feelings? And it broke out to a full-flooded debate for about 15 minutes where I just sat back and let the coaches go at it. And there was some argument that we have to have texting. It's, whatever. It's 2015. Why can't I text the kid? And another group, absolutely not. Don't want to text. Texting is an immediate form of communication. So if I'm sitting at a dinner table and a kid texts me, I have to respond to him. I don't want to do that. And so finally a coach just stops and looks at me and goes, damn, Vic, you got a really tough job. You got to do this for 130 schools, and we can't get 5 guys in the same room to, get on the same page. And then, kind of similar thing too. I did a meeting and with the whole staff, and the head coach goes, I'm going to introduce you, but I got to run and do a hit on ESPN. So I got to step out, but then I'll come in. But feel free to talk to my staff, whatever you need. They're a great, open and honest staff. We do things the right way, which every coach always said, and 99% of them do. So he introduces me, we get going, he leaves, we start talking about summer camps, when summer camps was a big thing. And finally a coach looks at me and goes, Vic, these things are the worst thing in the world. I hate them. I don't like my whole June taken away, blah, blah, blah. These are the worst. They don't do anything. They don't move the needle recruiting. Have a really good discussion. Coach comes back in, and he goes, what are we talking about? And I said, we're talking about summer camps. And he goes, Vic, I got to tell you, summer camps are the most powerful tool we have in the recruiting. We absolutely need them. I don't know of a more important tool we have. And the coach who was just arguing me for 10 minutes about how bad they were said, that's exactly what I was just telling him, Coach. I want more camps. And I was just like,
of course.
And he grabbed me afterwards and said, that's the boss. I got to do it. And, you understand exactly what compliance people have to deal with all the time. So
100%. I love it. Well, man, I feel like this could be a series in and of itself. Again, so many fascinating considerations, competing priorities. Really appreciate your perspective. I feel like, at least for me personally, this is like one of the fastest. I'm like, oh, damn, we're already at the time. So I really appreciate the time, the experience, the insight. The conversation as well. I know our listeners will really enjoy this as well. So this is it for another episode of the NIL Show. I am Adam Cook signing off for Sean Ellenby and Stephen Farrick. We will see you guys next time.